Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Ethiopia's Prime Minister becomes the first foreign leader to visit Sudan since its descent into brutal conflict last April. Meanwhile, trapped residents from the besieged city of Al-Fashir in the country speak of drones hunting down civilians in the streets. Meanwhile, neighbouring South Sudan's facing more economic turbulence as the value of its currency continues to plummet. Civil servants now earn a monthly salary of just €14. And women continue to be on the front lines of the fallout of war. I speak to a leading voice on women's rights in conflict settings on the continent about what can be done to shore up protections, particularly in the context of the Boko Haram insurgency in Nigeria. But first, South Sudan's de facto leader, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, hosted Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed on Tuesday. His reception at the coastal town of Port Sudan is the highest level state visit since Sudan was plunged into war last April as the military and the RSF paramilitary wrestle for the upper hand. Abiy was previously seen as being closer to the RSF and hosted its leader, Mohamed Hamdan Daglo, in Addis Ababa in December. Ethiopia says that Tuesday's meeting was aimed at helping restore stability to Sudan. Now, the war has displaced millions, ushered in the spectre of famine, and led to accusations of atrocities on both sides. Some of the most disturbing reports have come from the besieged Darfuri city of Al-Fashir. It's at the centre of a months-long fight for control between the rival forces. It was once a humanitarian hub, but trapped residents have spoken to our regional correspondents of indiscriminate violence and the deliberate targeting of civilians. Bastien Renouy has more.
Before the war broke out between the Sudanese military and the Rapid Support Forces in April 2023, hundreds of thousands of internally displaced people were already living in Al-Fashir. But since the war broke out, many more arrived. They thought that the capital of North Darfur will be a safe haven and that they will be far from the fighting. Since the beginning of May, it's no longer the case, especially in the northern part of the city around Abu Shouk IDP camp. The army and the Rapid Support Forces are fighting in this area, and according to our witness, Rapid Support Forces members are now targeting civilians.
So I went to Abu Shouk camp and Abu Shouk camp market. So I saw the drone of RSF is targeting the families, targeting the market, targeting whatsoever, killing. It's every day there's families, children has been died. So what I really see there is people are running. The movement, the displacement of the people, especially people of Abu Shouk.
Those who are injured cannot be treated. There is just one hospital remaining in Al-Fashir, and according to medical NGO Médecins Sans Frontières, it was targeted a few days ago by bombardments. Some buildings were destroyed. The doctors say that they don't have enough medicines and that it's impossible to take care of everyone. So many people are trying to escape from Al-Fashir at the moment. According to the UN, since the beginning of April, at least 330,000 people have escaped from the city. Many of them have been displaced to Zamzam camp in the south of Al-Fashir. But the situation there is not better. According to Médecins Sans Frontières, there is a lack of humanitarian assistance. There is not enough food. One child dies every 2 hours because of a lack of food in this camp.
Well, the conflict has also made life more difficult for neighbouring South Sudan, which was carved out of Sudan in July 2011. Now, Juba's economy has been reeling since a pipeline crucial to transporting its oil abroad was ruptured in Sudan in February. South Sudan's economy has also been hit by the meltdown of its currency, which has depreciated by 97.5% since 2013. Our team tells us more.
I want you to take me to Juba town. How much?
5,000.
It's expensive, too expensive.
It's not about being expensive. That's the price, my friend.
Inflation is on the rise. The South Sudanese pound is crumbling and wages are unable to keep up. When the nation became independent in 2011, the exchange rate was $1 to 3 South Sudanese pounds. Today, $1 is worth 3,000. Since he began working 3 years ago, Mike has felt the impact.
I used to buy like 5 bananas for 1,000, but now 1 banana is 1,000.
South Sudan imports most of its food. Because of the volatility of the local currency, people in this market have long prioritized US dollars. But last year, the government restricted its use to improve the value of the SSP. Business owners therefore have to adjust their prices daily.
We want the fixed price because we cannot ban the dollars. We normally bring things from outside the country, and that is the only money we are using. If they can lower for us the dollar down, or can get for us like a fixed amount of the dollar, so that we will know how we will do our business.
The local economy has been on a downward spiral for years. Some experts blame the government and say the situation has gotten worse since last year, when oil exports were disrupted because of the war in neighbouring Sudan.
With the poor governance, then you have this. The roads are not fixed. The security situation is not fixed. Domestic production is next to nothing. And then over-reliance on oil. The issue of diversifying the economy, everybody knows that has to happen.
Oil currently contributes to 90% of government revenue. The African Development Bank has recently approved an $8.6 billion grant to boost non-oil income in the country.
Now, the multinational task force tackling Boko Haram militants say that scores of the jihadists and their relatives have surrendered in Niger and Cameroon. Now, since it began in 2009, the extremists' armed campaign has spread from northeastern Nigeria to neighbouring countries. A total of 56 people reportedly have handed themselves in to that task force since July. Now, the jihadist conflict overall has left more than 40,000 dead and displaced around 2 million in Nigeria itself. Despite security forces' pushback against Boko Haram, earlier this month, at least 32 people were killed in the first suicide attacks seen in the northeast in 5 years. Now, witnesses say that the attackers were women, and authorities blame Boko Haram. From abduction to being used as weapons to the fallout from displacement, women and girls are extremely vulnerable in conflict zones. Dr. Aisha Mohammed Oyebode is a leading voice in women's rights in conflict settings and joins me now. Dr. Aisha, thanks so much for speaking to us. Now, first of all, when we were talking earlier, you were pretty stark in your characterization of how you believe that Boko Haram sees women. Can we start there? Would you mind sharing that with our viewers and also tell us about what you think can be done about it?
Okay, so women have been the greatest casualties of this conflict, and they're seen as expendable, unfortunately, by Boko Haram. Indeed, suicide improvised explosive devices are thought to be cheaper or are seen to be cheaper than mechanical bombs. So women are abducted, they're coerced, they're victimized. And the most alarming statistics, I'm sure you know, is that in the entire history of the world, Boko Haram has used more women and girls as suicide bombers. We're talking in the region of over 250 women and girls in the last seven years. And some of them are as young as 7. And in the most recent attack, if you remember, there was a woman who was carrying a child on her back. So that really is the challenge that we're seeing with Boko Haram at this particular time.
So you've outlined some of the thinking that might lead to why we're seeing women being used as weapons, but also in terms of the nature of the victimhood that they experience. You know, conflict that by its nature creates victims. Nigeria's seen millions of victims from all kinds of backgrounds. What's so unique about the female experience or women's experience of being on the victim side of this conflict?
So our view is that the notion of women being expendable is rooted in the historic and cultural attitudes that undervalue women's lives. More importantly, research has shown that societies that undervalue women, that do not provide them with adequate protection in peacetime, right? When there's war and the structures begin to break down and there's a state of fragility, right? War then exacerbates the situation. So you begin to see things like where in societies where there's a lot of structural violence, forced marriage, illiteracy, lack of empowerment, there's no personal safety or security. When there's a war or a situation of fragility, women, the situation in war mirrors the situation in peacetime. More importantly, and as a result of that, that is why we believe that Boko Haram has weaponized sexual and gendered violence in this conflict.
And that's actually played into some of the findings that your foundation has released in a recent report. It focuses a lot on what's happened to the Chibok girls who were abducted about 10 years ago. 21 of the women, children who were returned had children, 34 children. There's so many aspects to this. For you, in your experience, what is the most key place to start when trying to shore up protections for women and girls in this kind of context?
Okay, so I think the first thing is we need to start to shift our perspective. If you imagine, actually between the 10th anniversary and today, another girl has returned. She returned with 3 additional children. So we're looking at 37 children now, and she came back pregnant. So you can imagine the scale of the sexual violence that was going on. Some of these girls were abducted at the age of 13. So we need to shift our perspective. If we follow, for example, some of the attitudes of the UN and the Rome Statute of the ICC, which has criminalized forced marriage. Forced marriage actually in conflict is considered a crime against humanity. So it's really important for us to begin to understand that. The other thing we need to understand is that this violence has many authors, as I say. And what do I mean by that? If you recall, at some point, Boko Haram did affiliate itself with ISIS, and so which means that these organizations are beginning to sponge off each other in terms of attitudes and their approach to women. So at the end of the day, I suppose the most critical thing is we need to review the historical, social, and political attitudes around how women are treated in our society.
Dr. Aisha, thank you so much for taking the time to share your perspective with us and the work that you're doing to try and shore up protections for women and girls on the front line of violence and conflict. Well, the incidence of gender-based violence in the Central African Republic have tripled since 2020, with numbers that may still be a conservative reflection of the scale of the problem, as few victims dare to report their ordeals. Our team has more.
Priska is fighting to get treatment for her daughter raped by a stranger in 2020.
My daughter was coming back from church, and on the way, someone grabbed her by force and raped her.
Priska's daughter's ordeal is not an isolated one. Every year, more and more cases of sexual violence are recorded in the Central African Republic. This organization in Banjul offers victims support, legal advice, and care. Staff here say the country's judicial system must take cases of sexual abuse more seriously.
We have several cities that the courts do not cover. In these areas, it is the law of the strongest that prevails, and that's where we have many cases. We must fight against impunity. We must judge them. We must raise awareness to show that the courts are doing their job and that the perpetrators will never be spared.
Few victims dare to report attacks. Miriam was first raped by armed militants during the 2013 conflict. Later, it happened again, this time with members of his own family.
When I didn't speak up, people didn't understand. It was when I broke the silence that people understood that I have a child born from rape. I was taken care of free of charge by the Denis Mukwege Foundation to carry out a surgical procedure, and today I have become an activist, so the secret is to break the silence.
The social stigma about what happened to Miriam means that her own son now faces an uncertain future after having been forced out of school 2 years ago.
That's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.